What happens when a being of unimaginable power, a warrior born of stars and cosmic fire, is hurled into a universe where even gods tremble at the whisper of her name? This was the question that burned silently across the void, a question that would shatter realities and twist the fates of billions in the grim darkness of the far future. In the void between worlds, where darkness had weight and silence carried the echo of doom, a sudden anomaly tore through the immaterium, a rift of energy so violent it shook the very foundations of the warp. From that rupture she came. Captain Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, flung from her own universe into a galaxy consumed by endless war, where humanity's light flickered feebly against a tide of horror and despair. The first sensation was disorientation, as though the universe itself were a living thing, pressing against her, whispering in tongues older than time. Colors she could not name danced before her eyes, and voices, 10,000 voices, screamed in her mind, echoing the chaos of the immaterium. Her body ached, her senses rebelling against the unnatural physics that defied everything she had known. Yet, in the core of her being, the unyielding fire of her soul flared. She was a warrior, and warriors endure. Even here, even now, she would stand, around her the void convulsed. Starships, ancient as the Emperor's memory, drifted broken and scarred across the darkness. Their once mighty weapons now lay cold, and their hulls bore the claw marks of demons and Xenos alike. War had come to every corner of this galaxy, and death was the only constant. Yet for all its scale, for all its terror, the universe seemed to pause, almost in recognition, as though it sensed the arrival of something far beyond its reckoning. She had power enough to rival the sun itself, yet here, even the laws of physics seemed to challenge her. Her first encounter was not subtle. A demon of immense size, its form twisted beyond human comprehension, erupted from the warp, drawn by the energy that clung to her like a beacon. Its eyes, pits of molten hatred, fixed upon her. She didn't hesitate. Light flared from her hands, energy coiling around her like serpents of molten fire. The blast tore through the demon's flesh, yet even as it screamed in fury and agony, more emerged, shadows dancing between the real and unreal. She realized with a chill that the warp did not simply house monsters. It was a sentient, malevolent force, and it hungered for her essence. It was in that moment, as she fought in the endless twilight of the warp, that she felt the weight of this galaxy's history pressing against her. Warhammer 40K was no mere battlefield. It was a universe forged in blood, ruled by the iron will of the Emperor of mankind, a god, emperor whose empire spanned millions of worlds. The Imperium was a fortress of humanity against a cosmos where chaos roamed free, where Xenos devoured the innocent, and where corruption festered like a cancer in the heart of mankind itself. Tales of space marines, genetically enhanced superhuman warriors, and the almost mythical legions of the Adeptus Astartes had reached even the deepest voids of this universe. And now she was a new variable in this unending war, a being the Imperium might fear, and the galaxy might pray for or against. She crashed onto a desolate world, a dead planet where once proud civilizations had risen and fallen beneath the shadow of the warp. The air was thick with dust and the remnants of ruined technology, and the sky burned with unnatural hues, the result of 1,000 psychic storms tearing at reality. As she stood, brushing ash from her armor, she could feel eyes upon her. Not human eyes, something older, darker, and infinitely cruel. It was then she sensed him, a space marine, one of the Emperor's chosen, towering and clad in cerulean armor that gleamed even in the dying light. His gaze was both a judgment and a challenge. "You are not of this Imperium," he said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying the weight of countless campaigns. Yet the warp screams in your presence. Who are you, and why do you tread where men fear to linger? Her voice, strong yet wary, cut through the eerie winds. I am called Carol Danvers. I fight for justice in my world, and now I fight to survive in yours. The Marine studied her, sensing the radiance of her power, the fire that could rival a star. He knew enough of the legends to understand that she was something beyond a mere warrior, a being that could tip the balance of entire campaigns. Yet, as a son of the Emperor, he understood the rules of engagement. Power without loyalty was chaos incarnate. Then fight, if you must. But know this, in the Imperium, loyalty is everything, and betrayal is the death of souls. He warned, raising his weapon, not in threat, but as acknowledgment of the strange and deadly alliance that was to come. And fight she did. From that barren world, through the ruins of forgotten cities, across battlefields littered with the remnants of Astartes and Xenos alike, she moved like a storm incarnate. The Imperium's enemies learned quickly the fury of a being who commanded light and fire as weapons. Orcs, demons, traitor space marines, they fell before her, not merely defeated, but obliterated, their essence screaming into the void. Yet for every victory there was cost. The warp itself began to recognize her, to conspire against her. Shadows whispered secrets, tempting her with power, threatening to consume the very light within her. It was here, amid the blood-soaked sands and ruined cities, that she first learned the true magnitude of the galaxy's despair. The Imperium was a fragile thing, held together by faith, fear, and iron. Civilizations had crumbled beneath the machinations of chaos. Worlds had burned under the assault of tyrannids, and the shadow of the Necrons lingered like a tombstone over dead suns. And now she was a new force in this delicate, desperate balance, a being whose power could either save or doom this galaxy. Yet Captain Marvel, as always, would not falter. She was fire incarnate, a warrior who had faced cosmic horrors and lived. Here, in the heart of Warhammer 40,000, she found herself at the intersection of fate and fury, a solitary beacon of hope, or perhaps the herald of annihilation. Her next steps would define the fate of worlds. As she rose above the ruins, the sky ripped open, revealing the immaterium in all its terrible glory. From the cracks of reality, the forces of chaos prepared to strike, sensing the presence of a challenger who could rival the gods themselves. And yet, for the first time in eons, the warp felt a tremor, not of domination, but of fear. Something new had entered the galaxy, and it would not bow. The question lingered in the air, heavy as the ash and smoke around her. Could one warrior, no matter how powerful, survive the relentless, merciless horror of Warhammer 40,000? Or would even she, the star, born, become a casualty in a universe that devours hope? What happens when light clashes with darkness so absolute that even the stars seem to recoil? For Captain Marvel, that question became her waking nightmare. Her arrival had already caused tremors across the galaxy, whispers of a star-born warrior who could rival the Emperor's angels of death, a being whose power could ignite suns and shatter worlds. Yet the Imperium, a fortress of faith and iron, did not welcome her with open arms. The space marines she encountered had the instincts of warriors who had seen the universe burn 1,000 times over, and they measured every new presence with caution, suspicion, and the threat of death. She had barely touched the ground on that desolate planet before a fleet of ships, black as night and scarred by battle, descended from the heavens. These were the Adeptus Astartes, sons of the Emperor, their cerulean armor adorned with purity seals and the emblems of their chapters. They were the first true test of her power and resolve in this universe. Their captain, a towering figure named Darius Valen, stepped forward with the authority of one who had led thousands into the crucible of war. His gaze was hard, yet there was a flicker of recognition, not of who she was, but of the threat and potential she represented. "You are not of this galaxy," Darius spoke, his voice echoing across the blasted plains. "And yet the warp cries in your presence. You are a weapon of light, perhaps even a god in flesh. Tell me, why should we not strike you down where you stand?" Her eyes, blazing with cosmic fire, met his without hesitation. "Because I am not your enemy, not yet. But I will fight anyone who threatens the innocent, anywhere, anytime. That is my mission." The Space Marine studied her, sensing the raw magnitude of her power. There was something different about her, not just in strength, but in essence. She carried the fire of the cosmos itself, yet tempered by a humanity that had no equivalent in the Astartes' centuries of martial indoctrination. Darius hesitated, sensing both the danger and the potential. "Very well," he said finally. "We will see if your strength is enough to survive this galaxy. Follow me. You will witness the Imperium's front lines, but beware. Even the strongest can fall where faith and steel fail." And so she followed, stepping into a war that was unlike anything she had ever faced. Worlds lit by fire and shadow stretched endlessly, each one a theater of carnage where human soldiers, Xenos, and the servants of chaos clashed in an unending ballet of death. Here, the rules she knew no longer applied. The laws of physics, bent beneath the influence of the warp, psychic powers tore through reality, and life itself seemed expendable in the pursuit of survival. Her first mission was grim. On the industrial world of Calthrex, the Adeptus Mechanicus had reported a breach in the defense lines. A cult of chaos had taken root within the planet's forges, corrupting the machines and enslaving the workers. Captain Marvel watched as Darius led his squad through the smoke-choked streets, the sound of bolter fire and the screams of the corrupted filling the air. The chaos cultists were not like any enemy she had fought before. Twisted by the warp, they bore flesh and metal fused into grotesque forms, their minds shattered by demonic possession. When they struck, she unleashed the full extent of her power. Energy flared around her, a storm of light that incinerated demonic flesh and sent psychic echoes screaming back into the warp. Bolts of pure cosmic energy ripped through the corrupted streets, cleansing the forges in flames brighter than any sun. And yet, with every victory, the warp twisted, warping reality around her. Shadows moved where no light reached, whispering promises of omnipotence and despair, testing her resolve. Darius, ever vigilant, noted the subtle shifts in her demeanor. "Do not let them tempt you," he warned. "The warp seeks to devour anything that burns too brightly. Strength without discipline leads to ruin." She nodded, though a chill ran down her spine. She had faced enemies that threatened galaxies before, but here, power alone could not guarantee survival. Every action carried weight. Every choice had consequences not just for her, but for entire worlds teetering on the edge of annihilation. Her journey continued to worlds racked by war, the hive world of Malgrath, where tyrannid swarms devoured everything in their path, the Agri, world of Erythra, under siege by orc warbands that turned farmland into battlefields of carnage, and the decimated shrine, world of Valdrek, haunted by the restless dead and the lingering touch of Necron tomb spires. Each confrontation tested her resolve, her strength, and the limits of her morality. On Malgrath, she faced a tyrannid bio-titan. Its claws were the size of tanks, its maw a gaping vortex of teeth and venom. The Adeptus Astartes faltered before it, their weapons barely slowing its advance. Captain Marvel soared into the sky, the air around her crackling with radiant energy, and struck with unrelenting force. The beast roared, a sound that vibrated through the planet's crust, yet even as it fell, she knew the Tyranids were only one of many horrors. The galaxy itself was alive with predation and despair. Her reputation began to spread. Whispers of the star-born avenger reached the ears of both allies and enemies. Imperial commanders debated her usefulness and danger. The Adeptus Mechanicus observed her energy patterns with awe and fear, speculating that she might be a weapon capable of rivaling the Emperor's most sacred relics. And deep within the warp, the demons and gods of chaos took notice, their eyes turning toward the intruder who burned brighter than any mortal, or immortal, they had ever known. Yet the greatest challenge was not physical. It was philosophical, spiritual, and psychological. The Imperium demanded obedience, yet she answered to none but her own conscience. The warp tempted her with visions of power beyond imagining, but she clung to her humanity, the core of who she was, refusing to be seduced by corruption. Every victory brought her closer to understanding the stakes. Here, power alone was meaningless unless guided by purpose, and even purpose could falter under the relentless tide of war. Her interactions with the Space Marines grew complex. Darius, once wary, began to see the potential of an alliance. "You fight with fire and light," he said, "but you lack the discipline of a son of the Emperor. That may yet be your undoing or your salvation." She respected him, even as she chafed under the rigid hierarchy and the weight of millennia of indoctrination. Together, they forged a partnership uneasy but necessary, a convergence of cosmic power and human steel. And then, amid a shattered world orbiting a dying sun, she received a warning that chilled even her radiant heart. A warp storm the size of a planet was forming, and within it, the whispers of a being more ancient and malevolent than any she had ever encountered. The demons of chaos stirred with anticipation. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. This was no mere battle. It was the beginning of a war that could engulf all reality. Captain Marvel clenched her fists, her eyes blazing with defiance. She had faced impossible odds before, yet nothing had prepared her for the horrors of Warhammer 40K. Here, the light could be snuffed out in an instant, and even the brightest star could fall to darkness. And yet she would not yield. The war had become personal, and she had the power and the will to stand against it. As the warp storm grew, swirling with the colors of madness and despair, she realized the truth. In this universe, survival was not enough. To endure, to protect, and to fight, she would need more than power. She would need strategy, allies, and the courage to confront horrors that defied imagination. And so she rose, a solitary beacon against the consuming darkness, ready to strike back at a galaxy that would not yield. The Imperium, the warp, and the endless tide of Xenos and demons were now aware of her presence. The question remained, would the star-born avenger be the galaxy's salvation, or would she become yet another casualty in its endless, merciless war? What would happen if a being of pure light entered a universe defined by unending shadow? For Captain Marvel, the answer was slowly revealing itself, and it was more terrifying than anything she had ever imagined. The warp storm that had appeared on the edge of the Calthrex system was no ordinary disturbance. It was a living wound in reality, pulsating with malevolent energy and fed by the countless souls lost to chaos over millennia. She could feel it even before she approached, a cold, suffocating presence that gnawed at her mind and tested her limits. Every instinct screamed that this was no place for even the strongest warrior. The Imperium, however, demanded action. Darius Valen, his cerulean armor scarred from countless battles, approached her amidst the ruins of a planet still smoldering from recent conflict. "We cannot allow this storm to reach populated sectors," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in his posture. "Entire systems would be lost. If you are to help us, it will be here now." She nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a gravity heavier than any she had known. In her own universe, she had fought villains who sought power, conquerors who wished to dominate, threats that could be measured and faced. Here, the enemy was amorphous, omnipresent, and cruelly sentient. The storm was alive, and it was hungry. Their first approach revealed the horrifying scale of the warp's power. Entire cities had been consumed, their structures twisted into grotesque forms, streets contorted like sinew, and the air thick with the cries of lost souls. Shadowy figures moved along the warped landscape, each one a demon or a mindless servant of chaos, yet each one radiating intelligence, malice, and an unnatural awareness of her presence. Captain Marvel moved with precision, her body a blur of speed and light. She struck down demons before they could even realize she was there, her blasts of cosmic energy cutting through reality as if it were paper. Yet with every kill, the storm pulsed and recoiled, reacting to her power, adapting, evolving. The demons no longer moved randomly. They coordinated, predicting her attacks with an uncanny awareness, as if the warp itself were learning from her. Darius and his squad followed closely, providing support but careful to maintain distance. The Adeptus Astartes were legendary warriors, yet even they were not invincible. The bond between Captain Marvel and the Space Marines became a dance of strategy and raw power, their movements in perfect, deadly synchrony. Her radiant energy and their bolters and chainswords complemented each other, forming a bulwark against the storm's encroachment. The deeper they advanced, the more twisted the world became. Buildings rose like jagged teeth from the earth, rivers ran with molten metal, and the sky was a swirl of green and black lightning. It was a place where time and space themselves seemed fractured, each step forward a descent into the madness of the warp. Captain Marvel's mind, trained to withstand cosmic pressures, struggled against the psychic onslaught. Visions of entire galaxies burning, of friends and innocents suffering, invaded her thoughts. The storm was testing her, probing for weaknesses, tempting her with power and knowledge beyond comprehension. And then came the first true test. A creature, larger than any tyrannid or demon she had encountered, emerged from the heart of the storm. It was a chaos titan, a monstrous fusion of machine, flesh, and raw psychic energy, built over centuries by a forgotten sect of chaos warlords. Its eyes glowed with malice, its limbs a combination of living tissue and corrupted metal, and every movement sent ripples of terror through reality. Captain Marvel launched herself toward the Titan, her fists blazing with starfire. She struck again and again, energy searing through the corrupted metal, yet each blow seemed to strengthen the creature, as if it fed on her very light. Darius and his squad fired relentlessly, the thunder of bolters shaking the air, but even their combined firepower only slowed the monster's advance. It was a confrontation not just of strength, but of endurance, of willpower, and of the determination to survive in a universe that did not forgive weakness. In that moment, she realized the stark truth of Warhammer 40K. Even immense power was not always enough. Every victory carried consequences, every action had a price, and the line between salvation and damnation was razor thin. The storm was more than a battle. It was a crucible designed to break even the strongest, to force choices that could reshape the galaxy. As the Titans' attacks escalated, reality itself cracked around them. Gravity shifted unpredictably, fire rained from the sky, and the air filled with the wails of those trapped between dimensions. Captain Marvel's body screamed with exertion, yet she refused to yield. Light flared around her, pushing back the darkness in bursts of pure energy, illuminating the twisted landscape and giving the Space Marines the cover they needed to strike with surgical precision. The battle reached a fevered climax when the warp storm responded to her defiance. The ground shattered beneath her, psychic shrieks shook the air, and the Titan, sensing the threat she posed, unleashed a blast of energy that could have vaporized an entire city. Captain Marvel absorbed the attack, her body glowing with cosmic intensity, and countered with a strike so powerful that it tore a hole in the Titan's chest, sending its essence screaming back in. The warp, the ground trembled, the sky cracked, and for a brief, shining moment, the storm recoiled. Victory, however, was fleeting. The warp storm itself was not destroyed, only wounded. Its awareness had grown, and now it understood that the star, born avenger, was a force to be reckoned with. It would not forget her. It would wait, biding its time, gathering strength, and preparing for the day it would return. Darius approached, his expression grim but tinged with respect. "You fight as few can," he said. "But this is only the beginning. The Imperium has endured millennia of war, yet even we have never faced a storm such as this. You have proven your power, but beware. The galaxy will demand more than strength. It will demand sacrifice." Captain Marvel looked out at the horizon, where the remnants of the storm twisted into the distance. She understood now that her journey through Warhammer 40K had only begun. The galaxy was vast, merciless, and unforgiving. Allies would be scarce, enemies relentless, and the price of failure unimaginable. Yet her resolve burned brighter than ever. She had faced impossible odds before, and she would do so again. As she prepared for the next chapter of this relentless war, she could feel the eyes of the warp upon her, and somewhere deep within the shadowed currents of the galaxy, a new presence stirred. Ancient, malevolent, and hungry. The war was far from over, and the star, born avenger, had only just begun to carve her path through the crucible of darkness. The question lingered, heavier now than ever. Could a single warrior of light, no matter how powerful, survive a galaxy where hope itself is a weapon as fragile as glass? Or would even she be consumed by the infinite shadows waiting to claim her? Could a warrior forged of stars survive in a galaxy where trust was as fragile as the empires that claimed dominion over countless worlds? Captain Marvel, now a known presence across the Imperium, felt the weight of that question pressing upon her with every step. She had fought demons, tyrannids, and chaos titans, yet nothing had tested her in the way the Imperium itself would. It was not enough to destroy enemies. She had to navigate loyalty, hierarchy, and suspicion. In a universe governed by fear, faith, and unending war, even allies could become adversaries. The Adeptus Astartes, led by Darius Valen, escorted her to the fortress, world of Praxian, a bastion of the Imperium known for its strategic importance and the sprawling manufactorums of the Adeptus. Mechanicus. The city was a labyrinth of steel and fire, where massive forges produced the weapons of humanity's survival and armies trained under the watchful gaze of the Emperor's servitors. Yet even here, in the heart of human industry and faith, she could sense the undercurrent of paranoia. The Inquisition had heard rumors of her arrival, whispers of a being who wielded power unlike any they had catalogued. To some, she was a savior; to others, a threat to be eliminated. "You must understand," Darius said as they walked through the molten, lit corridors. "The Imperium does not take kindly to outsiders. even those who fight for humanity can become liabilities. Your power is unmatched, but it is also unpredictable. Trust is earned, not assumed." She nodded, aware that her cosmic strength, which had carried her through countless battles, might not be enough in a galaxy ruled by suspicion. She had survived alien invasions, tyrannical empires, and gods of destruction, yet here she realized that survival was a matter of more than raw power. It was strategy, diplomacy, and moral clarity. The Imperium's leaders were quick to test her resolve. Representatives of the Adeptus Mechanicus, adorned in red robes and cog-laden armor, scrutinized her energy signatures, muttering in binary cant about the origin of her power. "This being's energy field is anomalous," one servitor noted, its voice monotone but edged with unease. "It cannot be replicated with any known human or Xenos technology." Captain Marvel understood that the galaxy measured strength differently here. In her universe, might was often enough. In the Imperium, might had to be tempered with discipline, obedience, and the wisdom to survive millennia of ceaseless war. She accepted the challenge, determined to prove that her power could serve humanity without succumbing to corruption. Her next mission tested that resolve in ways no battle ever had. Reports had come of a Necron tomb, world awakening in the segmentum obscurus, its armies rising from ancient crypts to claim worlds that had long been abandoned. Darius Valen, recognizing the threat, summoned Captain Marvel to join the campaign. "We will need more than firepower," he warned. "The Necrons are relentless. They do not reason, they do not relent, and their machines will adapt to anything we throw at them." The journey to the tomb world was a descent into desolation. Stars seemed to dim as they approached, and the void itself felt oppressive, heavy with the echoes of civilizations long dead. Captain Marvel felt the pull of the Necron technology, an unnatural coldness that contrasted sharply with the fire in her soul. These were not living beings in the traditional sense, yet their purpose was singular and absolute: eradication. When they landed, the battle began immediately. The Necron warriors emerged from the sands like a tide of steel and green energy, their weapons emitting pulses that corroded both metal and flesh. Captain Marvel surged into action, her cosmic blasts tearing through ranks of the undead soldiers. But the Necrons adapted with alarming speed. Shields reconfigured, energy flows rerouted, and what seemed like victory in one moment became a renewed challenge the next. Darius and his Astartes fought alongside her, their disciplined tactics providing structure to the chaos. "Your power is magnificent," he said amidst the roar of battle, "but even it must work within the framework of strategy. Chaos will exploit anything untempered." Captain Marvel began to understand that the Imperium's victories were not achieved solely through might. They were forged in discipline, planning, and unity. Her energy was unmatched, yet without coordination, it could be rendered useless against enemies who adapted instantaneously, like the Necrons. As the battle raged, the sky above the tomb world shimmered with unnatural colors. The warp stirred again, sensing the intrusion of a being whose power rivaled the might of the Emperor himself. Demons of subtle cunning began infiltrating the battlefield, twisting reality in small but deadly ways, attempting to lure Captain Marvel into overreach, to exploit even the slightest hesitation. She refused. Every strike, every burst of energy was calculated. She learned to anticipate the subtle shifts in the battlefield, to complement the disciplined strategy of the Astartes with her overwhelming force. Slowly the tide turned. Necron constructs fell, their ranks breaking under the combined might of steel and starfire. Yet even in victory, she could feel the presence of something greater awakening within the tomb. World, a consciousness that had lain dormant for millennia, now stirring in response to her light. When the battlefield finally fell silent, Captain Marvel stood amidst the ruins, smoke curling around her like a living thing. The Imperium had survived another trial, but at a cost. Many warriors lay fallen, and the shadow of the awakened Necron intelligence loomed over the planet like a storm yet to come. Darius approached her again, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have proven yourself today. The galaxy has not yet seen the full extent of what you are capable of. But remember this, every action here resonates across centuries. The enemies of humanity are patient, they remember, and they will strike back." Captain Marvel looked out over the barren landscape, her mind processing the scale of what she had learned. Warhammer 40K was a galaxy where battles were eternal and victories fleeting. Power alone could not save worlds. It required wisdom, restraint, and the courage to act when all seemed lost. As she rose to leave the world, the warp pulsed beneath her feet, sending a subtle, sinister tremor through reality. Somewhere, in the infinite expanse of the galaxy, the forces of chaos were planning. Their whispers reached her even now, promises of unimaginable power and threats that pierced the soul. They knew she was a force unlike any other, and they would not rest until they had tested her to the limits of endurance. The star-born avenger clenched her fists, feeling the fire of her resolve burn brighter than ever. She had allies now, warriors of the Imperium who understood the necessity of her presence, and yet the galaxy remained a dangerous crucible. Every step forward brought new challenges, and every victory was but a prelude to the next trial. The question lingered, heavier than the weight of battle and death. Could Captain Marvel forge an alliance strong enough to withstand the galaxy's endless tide of horrors? Or would the darkness of Warhammer 40K ultimately consume even her star-born light? Above the horizon, distant lightning illuminated the desolate landscape, a stark reminder that the war was far from over. Captain Marvel knew that her path through this universe would demand more than strength. It would demand courage, cunning, and the willingness to confront the unimaginable. And she was ready. What happens when a being of immense light confronts a darkness older than time itself? Captain Marvel, now fully aware of the unforgiving nature of Warhammer 40K, faced a universe where every victory was fleeting and every enemy infinite. The galaxy stretched before her like a shattered jewel, each fragment bleeding chaos, death, and the whispers of unspeakable horrors. Her journey had carried her across desolate planets, battles, scarred worlds, and the twisted halls of the warp itself, but the challenges ahead promised no mercy. Reports arrived from multiple sectors. Tyrannid broods had emerged simultaneously in distant systems. Orc warbands threatened imperial worlds, and rumors of demon incursions were spreading across the segmentum solar. Worse, the warp storm that had recoiled from her light was growing stronger, twisting reality in its wake, and sending psychic ripples that even the most seasoned psychers of the Imperium struggled to contain. Darius Valen briefed her, his expression grim but resolute. "This is unlike anything we have faced," he said. "The galaxy teeters on the brink. We can hold, but only if we strike decisively. We will need you at the forefront, Avenger. Your power may tip the balance, but even you cannot fight all threats." Alone, Captain Marvel nodded, her eyes burning with determination. She understood the gravity of their situation. In her universe, wars had consequences, but they were finite. Here, conflicts were eternal and victories temporary. Every battle would spawn another, and every act of defiance against chaos would draw greater attention from the Immaterium. She had to be more than a weapon. She had to be a beacon of hope in a galaxy designed to crush it. Their first target was the industrial world of Gravemont, a planet whose forges and manufactorums were vital to the Imperium's war machine. Tyrannid swarms had broken through orbital defenses, devouring cities and consuming resources at a terrifying rate. Captain Marvel and the Astartes descended upon the planet, their landing marked by fire, light, and the roar of bolters. Below them the Tyranids swarmed, a living tide of claws, fangs, and predatory intelligence. She struck first, her hands igniting with cosmic energy that tore through the alien hordes like a supernova. Tyranid warriors fell before her in waves, their instincts overwhelmed by her blinding speed and power. Yet for every enemy destroyed, others advanced, their hive mind adapting, their tactics shifting with horrifying efficiency. Captain Marvel realized that brute force alone could not win this war. She needed strategy, coordination, and the unwavering discipline of her Astartes allies. Darius Valen led squads through the city's labyrinthine ruins, using precision strikes to weaken Tyranid formations, while Captain Marvel provided overwhelming support. The battle became a symphony of destruction. Bolters thundered, blades clashed, and light tore through flesh and steel alike. The Tyranids were relentless, yet the combined might of star-born power and human discipline slowly turned the tide. Amidst the chaos, Captain Marvel sensed another presence, something ancient, cunning, and unseen. The warp pulsed around her, and for the first time she realized that the storm she had wounded earlier had a mind of its own, watching, learning, and adapting. It whispered in her mind promises of omnipotence and despair, threats that echoed with a familiarity that unnerved her. This was no mere psychic disturbance. It was intelligence, malevolent and infinite, shaping reality to test her resolve. The Gravemont campaign was a victory, but it came at a price. Cities lay in ruins, and countless lives had been lost. Captain Marvel felt the weight of every casualty, her conscience grappling with the brutal calculus of war in a universe that demanded sacrifice. Even the Astartes, warriors who had faced death countless times, looked upon the devastation with solemn respect. Darius approached her as the smoke of battle drifted across the horizon. "You wield power unlike any we have seen," he said. "But this galaxy does not forgive recklessness. Every action has consequences. The forces we face are patient. They remember, and they will return stronger." She understood. The Imperium's enemies were not bound by time or morality. Chaos waited, biding its moment, and the Tyranids would strike again, their hive minds ever hungry for conquest. Even victory was only a pause in the endless tide of war. The next intelligence brought more troubling news. Reports from the Segmentum Obscurus indicated the emergence of a new faction, a rogue cabal of chaos, corrupted space marines, their loyalty shattered, their minds twisted by forbidden rituals. They called themselves the Obsidian Legion, and they had begun striking at key Imperial worlds, leaving destruction in their wake. Captain Marvel realized that this was a direct consequence of her presence. The warp, sensing a challenge to its dominion, had begun to manipulate events to draw her into confrontation. The first encounter with the Obsidian Legion was brutal. On the world of Draxium, she faced warriors who had once been paragons of the Emperor's will, now twisted into nightmarish forms by the gifts of chaos. Their weapons were enhanced by warp energy, their tactics cruel and unpredictable, and their minds resonated with the whispering guidance of the Immaterium. Captain Marvel and the Astartes fought with precision, yet even her power struggled against the combination of martial skill and chaotic enhancement. In the midst of battle, a vision pierced her mind. A figure, cloaked in darkness yet radiating command, observed her from the warp. Its presence was magnetic, terrifying, and intelligent. A being who had been orchestrating events from the shadows, waiting for the star-born avenger to reveal her potential. She realized that the war she was fighting was not just against armies and demons, but against an entity that viewed her as both a threat and a curiosity, shaping events to test her limits. Captain Marvel emerged victorious from Draxium, but the cost was staggering. The Obsidian Legion retreated, leaving behind ruins and echoes of what they had been. She felt the heavy truth of this galaxy. No battle could end the war, no victory could erase the suffering. The galaxy was a crucible of endless trial, and she had only begun to understand its rules. As she prepared to move to the next theater of conflict, the warp pulsed ominously. The storm, now fully aware of her capabilities, began to gather strength across multiple sectors. It was preparing not just for confrontation, but for something greater. A convergence of chaos, xenos, and the dark intelligence that lurked beyond comprehension. Captain Marvel realized that the universe itself was watching her, shaping its forces to challenge her at every turn. She clenched her fists, the fire of her resolve burning brighter than ever. Allies were gathering, strategies forming, and the Imperium looked to her as a weapon and a symbol. Yet the question remained, heavier than ever: could even a star-born warrior endure the full weight of Warhammer 40K, a galaxy where darkness is infinite and hope is fleeting? Above the horizon, distant worlds burned and fell under the influence of the warp, the signs of an unending war that had no beginning and no end. Captain Marvel knew that the trials ahead would demand more than power. They would demand endurance, cunning, and the courage to face a universe that would never relent. And she was ready. Have you ever stood at the edge of infinity and wondered if even a being of stars could survive the unending darkness? Captain Marvel now knew the answer not yet, but only because the universe had one final trial remaining. The galaxy had been battered, torn, and reshaped by her presence. Tyrannid broods had been delayed, the Obsidian Legion had been scattered, and countless demon incursions had been thwarted. Yet the warp had grown restless, and its intelligence, ancient, malevolent, and cunning, was ready to test her like no force before. The culmination began in the segmentum obscurus, where multiple warp storms converged into a single maelstrom, a swirling vortex of color, fire, and psychic malice. It pulsed with awareness, as though reality itself were a sentient predator, and at its heart, the Obsidian Legion and fragments of Tyrannid war fleets had gathered under the warp's command. Even the Necron tomb worlds, sensing the anomaly, stirred in response, their cold precision intersecting with chaos in a collision of raw power. Captain Marvel and the forces of the Imperium were outnumbered, outmatched, and facing an enemy that was both everywhere and nowhere. Darius Valen stood beside her, his armor scorched from countless battles. "This is the end game," he said. "Every strategy, every alliance, every victory, it has all led to this. We either endure or we fall, and even endurance comes at a cost." She nodded, feeling the immense pressure of the moment. The galaxy itself seemed to weigh upon her shoulders, the screams of billions echoing through the warp, reminding her that in this universe, victory was always measured in loss. "Then let's show them what we're made of," she said, her voice blazing with cosmic intensity. The battle erupted like a supernova. Captain Marvel struck first, piercing the heart of the maelstrom with beams of light that cut through reality, scattering demon and xenos alike. Bolters roared in unison with the space marines, chainswords met claws and metal, and the air trembled under the combined fury of fire, steel, and cosmic energy. Yet even her power was tested to its limits. Every strike drew the attention of the warp storm, which responded by warping the battlefield, twisting allies into illusions, and summoning horrors from every corner of the galaxy. She realized in a moment of terrifying clarity that the warp intelligence was not merely a force of chaos. It was a strategist, a predator that understood every move, every strength, every hesitation. It had orchestrated the convergence of Tyrannids, Obsidian Legion, and demonic entities specifically to crush her. The question of survival had never been about physical power. It had been about will, ingenuity, and the refusal to yield. Captain Marvel pushed herself beyond every limit she had ever known. Light flared around her like a miniature sun, and in that blaze she glimpsed the threads of the universe itself, the interweaving of life, death, hope, and despair. She could see the paths the warp had taken, the manipulations it had executed, and the possibilities that might save the galaxy. Every thought, every instinct, every particle of energy became a weapon, a strategy, and a shield. Darius and the Astartes fought with precision, protecting her as she unleashed her full power. The Tyranids fell in waves, the Obsidian Legion's corrupted weapons shattered under her radiant energy, and the demons of the warp screamed as their reality. Warping attempts failed to penetrate her light. Yet even as the maelstrom began to break apart, a deeper, darker presence emerged, a shadow within the storm itself, an entity older than the Emperor, a consciousness that had been orchestrating events across the galaxy for millennia. The final confrontation was not just physical, but psychic. The entity reached into her mind, offering visions of omnipotence, power beyond comprehension, and the promise of bending the galaxy to her will. But Captain Marvel, grounded in the humanity that defined her even among gods and monsters, rejected it. Light met shadow in a clash that resonated across stars, tearing at the very fabric of the galaxy. She channeled every ounce of energy, will, and determination into a single act, a blinding, searing explosion of cosmic light that struck at the heart of the warp storm, at the intelligence controlling it, at the chaos that sought to consume everything. The force of her attack shattered the storm. The Obsidian Legion was annihilated, Tyranid swarms were scattered back into the void, and demons were torn from reality itself. The warp intelligence recoiled, its whispers fading, its threads broken. Captain Marvel stood amid the wreckage, her body glowing, her eyes burning with the fire of victory, but even in triumph. The galaxy whispered that this war was eternal. Darius approached her, battered but alive. "You have done what few could even imagine," he said. "You have faced the impossible and emerged victorious. Yet remember, the galaxy does not sleep. War is eternal, and darkness will always return." She nodded, understanding the truth of his words. Warhammer 40,000 was a universe of unending conflict, of cycles of despair and courage, of light fighting against a darkness that would never relent. Her victory was monumental, yet temporary, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that demanded vigilance, sacrifice, and unyielding will. As she looked to the stars, Captain Marvel realized the paradox she now inhabited. A warrior of light in a galaxy designed to consume all light, a protector who could not rest, and a savior who knew that every act of heroism was but a brief respite in an unending tide of chaos. She had survived, yes, but she had also been changed. The universe had tested her in ways that defied comprehension, and she had endured not because of power alone, but because she had chosen to act with courage, clarity, and humanity. And somewhere, deep in the dark currents of the warp, the remnants of the storm whispered of her arrival, of the one who had dared to challenge infinite darkness and survive. The galaxy would remember her light, though the darkness would never forget. Captain Marvel clenched her fists, fire burning brighter than ever in her heart. She had faced the unthinkable and prevailed. But the war continued, the galaxy endured, and she would continue to fight for humanity, for hope, and for the fragile light that remained in the grim darkness of the far future. The final question lingered, echoing through the void. Could one warrior ever truly bring peace to a galaxy of endless war, or was her light destined only to shine briefly before the darkness consumed it once more,